The US debt has now reached $20.6 trillion. This debt is greater than what America produces in a whole year, considering the debt to GDP ratio is 104%. If the debt continues to rise with this rate, then it can have huge consequences for the country's creditworthiness and for the country's economy as a whole. My job today is to explain how this affects the economy and how the US can solve this issue. So let's go. Hey guys, hope you're doing great. Welcome to EconTube, the channel for people who are fascinated about economy like myself. If you're also one of them, remember to subscribe for more economic related content. That said, let's begin talking about the whole situation concerning the US debt. So, first of all, let us just account for why the size of the debt is so big. The primary reason comes from the US budget deficit, which through the years has contributed billions and even trillions of dollars to the debt. The deficits have been so high considering the government yearly spends hundreds of billions of dollars on their military. Furthermore, due to the latest financial crisis of 2008, it was necessary for respectively President Bush and Obama to add tax cut and increase government spending to get back on track for the US economy. Other than that, federal agencies such as the Social Security Trust Fund, or in other words the American people's retirement money, have more cash than needed, and that is used on buying US Treasury bonds. This cash is thereby transferred to the government so they can keep their spending as high as possible. Currently, just the Social Security Trust Fund owns $2.8 trillion worth of Treasury bonds. However, eventually the government has to give the money back, and the only way they can do that is by either raising taxes or getting more debts. Then again, the US has been doing this for a decade now, so why is the debt even a problem? Well, as the debt to GDP ratio increases, debt holders will in the long term question the US creditworthiness. They will probably ask for a higher interest on the bonds, or else will the demand for them decrease. This will lead to higher interest rate in the US, and with that the economy will have a much harder time to grow. Likewise, since the dollar currency is actually tied up to the value of treasury securities, and when the demand for it decreases, then it can weaken the value of the dollar. This causes that the foreign holders of the bonds will get paid back less, so the demand for treasury bonds will also decrease from this. In other words, the interest rate will rise even further. All of this will lead to the fact that the US may suffer a debt crisis, where for instance the Social Security Trust Fund won't have a big enough budget to provide for retirement benefits for baby boomers. Fortunately, there is a solution. This solution comes from John Makin, who was one of the leading and trusted economists in the US. The solution was based on the PDS framework, which you can see here. Here we have real output plus inflation, which stand for the total value of goods and services produced in the US economy. Next we have borrowing cost, where the interest on debt is included. At last we have taxes minus spending, which stands for the primary deficit for the country. So, what does this equation tell us about? If economic output minus borrowing cost is equal to a bigger number than the primary deficit, then the US debt is sustainable in the long term. To be more precisely, if the US pays the interest on the debt and produces a little extra, then it can eventually reduce its debt burden. On the other hand, if the output minus borrowing cost is less than the primary deficit, then the US will most likely face a debt crisis. Actually, it doesn't really matter if the US acquires more debt. The important thing though is that the debt to GDP ratio will decrease. After the Second World War, the ratio was similar to the ratio today, but they managed to lower the ratio because the following years the US experienced economic growth and high inflation. Today, having a high yearly economic growth is hard for the US, but having high inflation to reduce the debt burden is possible. Other than that, the US could also nowadays reduce the primary deficit by increasing taxes or cutting some of its spending. But with the new tax reform made by Donald Trump, which includes cutting taxes, then this option doesn't seem possible. Talking about Donald Trump's tax reform, do you guys think it will get the US economy in the right direction? Personally speaking, I don't really understand why the cuts are made for the wealthiest people in the US. Wouldn't it be better if they were made for the poorest, since that will probably increase their spending even more? I would like to know what you think down in the comments below so we can start a discussion. Anyway, thank you so much for watching this video. Leave a like or dislike whether you like this video or not. See you next time.